What's your I finally met my online friend horror story? I met a guy online, we really got on and he came over a few times so we could hang out. I did find him attractive and tried to hint that I was into him. Note, I can't flirt to save my life, but nothing ever happened. After a few dates, he suddenly vanished offline. No social media, he wasn't answering texts or emails, nothing. I thought he'd ghosted me. After 6 months he reappears. I asked him where he'd been and he said, "I don't want to talk about it." A few weeks after, there was a fad where people were Googling their names and posting humorous stories they had found about similar people with their name. Mine was about a ship that had my initials, and I started to Google friends' names just out of boredom, morbid curiosity, Googled his name and found a local news story from his area, one of those crime and courts things that he had been done for statutory rape of a minor, online grooming, and had his computer and phone seized as evidence. You dodged a big bullet. She dodged a fucking ICBM. Edit, first silver, thanks. She dodged dat big ass stone that killed dem lizards. Edit, thanks silver. Said he was 14. Turns out he was 38. My parents gave him a stern talking to. Edit, everyone is saying how he was a child molester and all that, but let me clear thing up. He was always nice and friendly online until I found his Facebook and saw his age. At which my parents had a mental breakdown. Was never allowed to play video games with him online again. Edit 2, okay, maybe he was born on a leap year obviously. Guy the first knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip cold be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up and he found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job. Or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses that he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked. Never texted. Never even emailed. Hell, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely still doesn't know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks a lot about until she showed up and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. This is way back in the mid-90s. Bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made friends with this guy from NC, he was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which should probably have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple months in, he mentioned he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could come by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. Now, there was no discussion or thought of sex, but I was pretty excited to meet this guy and see if he was as funny and charming as he was online. Well. Day arrives, dude shows up. I should mention that I and all my college friends were 18 or 19, this guy was 24. Or so he said. Guy looked like, and I'm not exaggerating, a cancer patient. Pale, gaunt features, long greasy pale blonde hair except where he was bald on top, and just generally looked like he was about to die or he was dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He insisted on hugging all of us. I was trying to remind myself that looks don't matter and that he was a cool guy despite his very unsettling appearance. But then, when we all started hanging out, things just got worse. He was asking really invasive questions of all of us, making weird comments to whatever was said, just all around creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend and actively rocking back and forth from discomfort. I lied and said I had hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, because that night he kept insisting we could share my tiny twin college bed. Nope, 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 nope. Last time I ever met anyone from that site. I don't know if it's a horror story, but it how I ended up where I live now. I played WoW for years with a pretty regular group, got to know them offline, and at one point two of them, a couple, invited me to move across the country. At the time I didn't have anything tying me to where I was, so I packed up and moved. Got out here, moved in with my friends, and everything seemed okay. My buddy was a long-haul driver, so he was always gone for days at a time. His girl would try to set me up multiple times with two of her friends at the same time, one in Minnesota. I ended up having a hard time finding work for a while, finally got a job though and was putting some money away while helping watch their kids. Out of nowhere one day my buddy accuses me of trying to fool around with his girl. Nothing had ever happened, but I had noticed her spending more and more time in my room when he wasn't there. I knew his history, and his previous relationship had ended after she cheated with a friend of his. He wouldn't listen, so I got kicked out without any warning, and they stole about $1,000 worth of my stuff and later moved. Ultimately it all worked out for me. Cut the friend and his girl out of my life completely and moved on. Now I have a good job here, wife and kids. Edit clarified that I cut out the friend and the girl, lol, not my wife and kids. We were friends online for years. We'd meet up every so often, and when we started families we'd meet up and take the kids to the zoos or whatever. She wanted us to go on a cruise together, with our husbands and kids. I made the comment towards the effect of, "We can't afford that," and she went nuts. "We shouldn't have had kids if we can't afford them, we shouldn't have more children, our life sucks blah blah blah," because I didn't want to go on a goddamn cruise with her and her bratty ass kid. Sounds like a nightmare. I love how "we can't afford a cruise" turned into "you can't afford your whole life, you irresponsible pleb." Right? I told her that the last I checked cruises weren't essential to child development, and she rebutted with "there are finance options." Bitch, I'm not trying to finance a cruise. I can't afford a cruise, said she. With rent and taxes too. But that's all right. It seems to me. We've other things to do. We'll make our way to walk the park. We'll search for shooting stars. We'll stay up late and after dark. We'll spy the moon and Mars. We'll take a stroll along the tide. We'll see the rolling sea. 'Cause after all, she said and sighed, the best of life is free. And so she slowly shook her head. We don't need something new. Just something made for us, she said. Her friend replied, fuck you. After college ended I was playing a game called EVE Online. I was in a corporation with a dude who I thought was the coolest. He had sold shit in-game for real-world money and had built a supercomputer. He had a smoking hot girlfriend, and had pictures of them rock climbing doing some super cool shit. He was also like a head chef where he worked, and since I was a chef as well, I had a little bit of a bromo crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job and all I had to do was move up there. I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop and bought a U-Haul and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive, he called me and told me the job was no longer available and I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he said to just come anyways. When I got there I was completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 apartment with 4 other people, in a 1-bedroom apartment. They had like 3 cats, which I am allergic to, and a kid as well. Day 1 it was all drugs and partying. I did not partake. I was not enthused. Day 2 I went into the city looking for a shit job to survive. I got one. It was shit. Day 3 my buddy tells me we're all moving out and into a nice apartment. Week 3 we actually move into a new apartment, and the first night in that apartment he starts beating his smoking hot girl in front of their kid. The second time he beat her, I called the cops. Him and his girl immediately said I was the bad guy and that they were just loving each other. They had the cops escort me from the apartment. So there I was, 1,700 miles away from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it's fucking raining on all my shit. Lars, you are a sack of shit and I hope you die of space herpes. A guy in a forum for a specific hobby would talk to me a lot but never revealed his real identity. Until out of the blue he suddenly asked me to please come to see him in hospital, where he died a few weeks later. I used to play WoW with my now ex. Our guild leader actually wound up moving to our state with his wife. My ex and I broke up before we got the chance to hang out with the guy, and right after the breakup he messaged my ex essentially asking if it was cool if he and his wife got me drunk and took advantage of me. Ex showed me screenshots when I was getting my stuff from his place and I cancelled my plans to meet the guy and his wife. My ex had been physically abusive and broke up with me to date the girl he'd cheated on me with. I'd tried leaving before but he'd fake suicide attempts and I was so scared he'd go through with it so I stayed. Even though he was in a new relationship he tried to keep tabs on me and control me, but I saw it as my chance to escape. I happened to move right after we split and he didn't know my new address. I blocked him on everything. Somehow he kept getting information on me though. Turns out the guild leader was feeding him everything. I hadn't deleted the guy off Facebook cause I figured he was only a problem in person. When I confronted him over Messenger, bringing up the abuse, and the guy said he choked you because you guys were arguing and he was afraid he wouldn't get the chance to speak. He still loves you. Side note, the choking was cause I was defending myself against accusations of cheating, which I hadn't done. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed, if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he descended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick bug. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, he was a nice dude, but I wound up ollieing out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know? What do you even say? He and I were part of the same forum many, many years ago. He was dealing with his issues and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to escape, where people wouldn't judge. Also, because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we got properly talking. I think it's when he told a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything with each other, over MSN. I'd give him advice about his love life and he'd listen to all my fuck-ups. It took quite a few fuck-ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it. We decided to give it a go, even though we lived 300 miles away from each other. We had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant, he lived with his ex-girlfriend for a bit even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex-GF who I'd given him advice on, who he had nicknamed Trouble and liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that, along with many other things, and finally moved in with each other. I thought our issues were gonna be solved when there was no distance between us. Ends up, we were just very different people who wanted very different things and the distance wasn't gonna change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's the horror story. Not the way he treated me, not the fact he probably cheated on me, not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he gets back in touch and we talk like it was in the beginning, when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I want to get back together. I said no. I told him that he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact asking me if I knew where he was because he hasn't turned up. The police got in touch too. The last phone call that day was from his mom, to let me know that he'd killed himself. He was driving cross-country with a friend. I said I had a couch floor they could crash on if needed. He was great, she was an annoying bitch. She hated everything, was annoyed by my cat, didn't like anything I had to eat or drink, etc. They were literally there for like 16 hours. I met a really cool group of people from a chat group website called XAT that lives in minimal distance away from me, like maybe 15 minutes, and the horror story part is that I was in my emo phase and probably made a great lasting impact on their lives as a Hot Topic connoisseur. After 4+ years of playing WoW together and chatting online and on the phone, he invited me to visit him in Australia. I figured it was safe, since I'd known him for quite a while and had never gotten any weird vibes, no flirtation, no creeperness, nothing. 2 days into my very clearly stated platonic visit, he tried to rape me. I ditched all of my stuff except what I had in a small duffel bag and took off, traveling on my own for the 2 weeks until my flight home. A few months later, I received an unsigned postcard from the Gold Coast that just said, "Thinking of you," with a smiley face. That's creepy as fuck. A couple of years ago this girl messaged me on Reddit saying she really connected with a comment I made about first seeing the ocean because she had just gone through a similar experience. She was going to come down to Chicago to visit a friend of hers and asked for suggestions of things to do. I gave her a bunch and then we kept talking and finding out we had more and more in common. We eventually started talking over the phone and text messages, and when she came down we went out for burgers and beer. We kept talking every day after that and I was really starting to like her. She said she wanted to come down to Chicago again and if she could stay with me. I told her of course, and a few weeks later she was here for Saturday and Sunday. Really it was mostly Sunday because she got in late on Saturday and fell asleep on my couch. The next day we went to the zoo and had a really amazing day. After that we came back to my place and decided to go to the brewery nearby which made a beer that had her name in it. We went there and then ended up bar hopping through until we ended up near the dive bar by my apartment. We drank and played pool there and eventually grabbed some to-go beers and headed back. I asked if she wanted to see the place by the river I like to go and drink and think. We sat and eventually started making out and decided to head back to my apartment. We hooked up and then the next day went to the south side to get breakfast at a place she really liked near her friend's apartment before she had to drive back. We kept talking after that and I was planning on coming up to visit her in Detroit, but then one day she just ghosted me out of nowhere. Not as horrible as some other stories, but it was really shitty for me because I actually really liked this girl and to this day I have no idea why she stopped talking to me. Edit, she's definitely not dead. We followed each other on Instagram and I saw that she was okay a bit after she ghosted me. Edit 2, went digging and was actually able to find the message thread for those of you that don't believe me. This is more of an embarrassment story. When I was in high school in the 90s I was active on the local dial-up BBS scene. I was friends with someone who went by the handle Venus. I knew she was a woman but had no idea what she looked like. I also knew she was dating a guy in real life with the handle Lord Gumby who was also a friend online. Being a socially misadjusted 15-year-old I had a crush on her anyway even though I knew they were both like 18. This was like 1992 so privacy wasn't as big a concern and they knew my address. This was also when people would randomly come by your house to see if you were home. That's unfathomable today. So one Saturday morning I'm at home on my computer totally disheveled, unshowered, and just gross in ratty sweatpants and no shirt. I hear a knock on the front door and go open it. There's a woman who was incredibly beautiful standing there and she just goes, "Hi. I'm Venus." I stood there for a minute, it seemed like jaw dropped trying to say something when Lord Gumby walked up and was like, "Hey doofus, ever met a woman before?" Needless to say I wanted to sink into a hole in the ground and die. But I hung out with them and I guess I wasn't too horrible because we hung out a lot after that. But that whole time I was like, fuck my life choices. Haven't talked to them in decades. I wonder how they're doing. It's not a horror story, it's a story about how I was put off meeting people from the internet. I was friends with a bunch of people I met through an online game. After about 2 years, I decided to meet 2 of them. The 2 I was meeting were a long-distance couple, one from one country and the other from mine. They had met many times and had spent 2 weeks together prior to meeting with me. We met in the city, said hi and hugged and did some touristy stuff, took their pictures etc. etc. But throughout the whole time, they weren't really talking to me. At first, I put it down to anxiety as I was nervous too. But even after lunch, they were only talking to each other and I felt left out. I even took a sneaky video of them talking to each other and sent it a friend, who agreed it was odd. When it was time for me to leave, I told them I had to go but I had a nice time, and they continued to chat to each other. I said it again but no response, so I started to walk away, until one of them said, "Oh bye." I was really hurt. It was like they didn't want me to be with them. I had spent a lot of money getting down, especially since at the time I didn't have a job. When I got back, I stopped talking to them. The friend who I sent the video to sent a message to them asking why they were ignoring me, and they tried to turn it on me saying that I was the quiet one and that I was being rude to them, especially leaving without saying goodbye. I blocked them all on the game. A few months go by and one of them finds my social media and tries to reconnect. Starts off well, and then goes back to blaming me. Haven't met anyone from the internet since. I used to play a war game and I was friends with this other person, was a guy, and we became good friends and talked and all. Then out of the blue he asked me to be his girlfriend. He was a truck driver in the USA and I was only 12. It freaked me out a lot and I ghosted him. It was a terrifying experience and a real eye-opener for me. I have a story a bit like this. When I was 14 I met a 30-year-old guy from New York online. He just randomly added me on a few things and we got talking. He would send me messages all the time to check how I was, ask me about school, try to help me with my homework, and he'd tell me about his work and what he and his girlfriend were up to. He had been to see a lot of bands and musicians I liked and had even worked with a few of them, and I loved hearing about his life in New York. This is the weird bit. We spoke for maybe a year, he sort of disappeared, and he never said anything inappropriate or tried to get photos or anything. He would send me photos of himself but it was like him playing with his cats etc., just really innocent pictures. I think he genuinely just wanted someone to talk to and in his head a minor with a similar taste in music was an appropriate person. I'm kind of like this now as the older person. It was completely unintentional. A friend I made on Out3 made a Discord server for the rest of us who read his FIC. After a bunch of us joined and got to talking it quickly became evident that the server was full of teenagers. I panicked, immediately told everyone my age and offered to bail if anyone at all was the least bit uncomfortable. But they all told me it was fine and that I was nice and they liked talking to me. So now I'm like the server mom, lol. And honestly they're all really nice kids. They're friendly, funny, and intelligent. Gives me hope for the future tbh. The same thing happened to me. Learned I shared a lot of philosophy with a Redditor, we started a Telegram group, and then I learned they were 15. Holy shit, I'm late 20s. I told them, and all their friends who joined the group. There are a lot of us, but everyone is really cool, and it's nice to be able to be a helpful adult mom unit to a bunch of really great, brilliant kids. My son was part of an online game group for over a year when the leader and a few others decided they'd had enough with immature teens joining in and acting foolish, so they instituted an 18+ only age limit. My son told them he was only 13 and did that mean he had to leave, and they were floored and obviously let him stay. This was mostly a group of 20-somethings from what I remember, and they all thought he was the same age as them the entire time. I was on MeetMe, met this guy who was super cool. We ended up texting every single day and I took the train out to Los Angeles to meet him. When I got there, he was being kinda shitty and he told me that he hadn't gotten much sleep because he was partying until 5 a.m. We walked to his house and when I walked into his room, I was kind of shocked. It was a 8x6.5 room. All he had was a mat on the floor and a small little jewelry box full of mementos on top of his suitcase of clothes. We took a nap together. Later, we went to get ramen and he asked me to pay. I didn't mind. We went back to his place and we listened to music while we waited to go to a party. Fast forward to that night, we met up with some of his friends and they were so mean to him. They kept roasting him and picking on him and he was visibly getting upset. I stopped him for a bit so his friends could walk ahead of us. I reminded him that it was all fun ND games and to ignore them. Ended up at the party and lots of people knew him. I sat out in the patio with a few cool people that I had just met while I waited for my friend to come back from saying hello to everyone inside. He never did. I was outside in the patio with these strangers for about 3 hours. People kept coming up to me and asking if I was alright. IDK if I looked sad or if I just looked like a plain loner. I went to find him and it was so packed. Didn't see him so I walked back. I seen his roommate and asked him to please tell my friend that I was gonna go get a motel. He went to tell him, came back and said my friend was being a dick and he would walk me back to the house instead so I didn't have to spend money on a hotel. We got to the house and I thanked him for walking all the way back home. I really appreciated it as my friend was probs inside doing coke or fucking girls. I went to bed in my friend's room and he woke me up in the middle of the night kissing me, trying to get his freak on. I simply said no, I'm not interested in having sex. His exact words were, "Are you serious? What was the point of you coming here? You're such a waste of time." My feelings were really hurt. I went back to sleep, woke up and left. Never wrote him after that. He had texted me a month later asking to borrow $50. I simply ignored the message and moved on. Sounds like a real piece of shit. This guy is the human equivalent of a skid mark. Flashback 15 years ago. I was talking to a person online I'd known for a few years. We weren't best friends, but we talked daily. Seemed like a nice guy. At some point he asked where I was from, and I mentioned that I lived in Philly and I was going to the Art Institute there, living in the dorms. Didn't give specifics other than that. Most people knew I was an art student at the time. I posted it about regularly on LiveJournal. A few days later I come home from class and see a message on AIM. Figured out where you live. I'm outside of the dorms at the cafe across the street. Meet me. This guy lived on the West Coast, and after finding out where I lived, he makes an unannounced trip across the country, tracked down the building where I lived in, and was camped out at the cafe across the street. Asking him to meet him. All of this without any heads up. I immediately felt uncomfortable, and didn't really know what to do. It's one thing to meet up, another thing entirely to make a trip cross-country and camp out in front of a person's residence. I didn't answer the AIM message right away and needed some time to calm down and think, get more rational. More messages started coming through, each reading slightly more hostile than the last. Okay, this guy traveled all this way. It'd be a dick move to ignore him, but at the same time, I felt like I was seeing red flags everywhere. I was legitimately creeped out. More messages came, and each time, they started to get more agitated, more impatient. He started asking for my class schedule so he could meet me outside class, asking where I'd be going, where I usually ate, what time my dinner schedule was. He started getting weirdly specific about wanting to know about every facet of my life. I was getting full on stalker vibes. So I lied, and told him that I was visiting my sister and that I'd be back over the weekend, and I'd just miss him. That's when he said, "That's fine. I can wait." And he did. 3 days later, he's still there, still messaging me that he's still at the cafe. Waiting. What the fuck are you waiting for? Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me you were coming? My privacy was having huge issues with all of this, and it got to the point I started feeling legitimately scared. I made a decision. Rather than meet him, I'd log out AIM, create a new handle, pretend I never existed at that point. I completely abandoned my LiveJournal and started posting under a new name, and went so far as to change my entire online persona. I never heard from him again. Oh shit, he's still waiting. Now that's a creepy thought. Sometimes I wonder what he'd do if he realized I changed my name, or if he still knows and harbors resentment to me. I wouldn't blame him, but at the same time, I don't think he realized how creepy he came off. I mean, it'd be one thing if he was like, "Hey, I'm in Philly, wanna meet?" Yeah, sure. Let's do the tourist thing and I'll show you my favorite places in the city. But no, it's, "I'm outside your building. Let me in." I fully blame him. I mean, it was okay for a while, but I ended up having to leave his house and take a bus in the middle of the night to a hotel because he was upset that I wouldn't kiss him or sleep with him and that I called him toxic for trying to get me to. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this asshole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive, too. I had my own apartment, so I said, "You know what, come stay with me." Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job, either. He sat in my apartment, day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. I had a layover in Amsterdam and I met up with a buddy I'd been chatting with on Soulseek for years, electronic music file sharing. He gave me directions to his work, we delivered a huge wheel of cheese to a church in the red light district, then got drunk and high in a bar. 10 out of 10 most Dutch experience possible in Amsterdam. Only horror show part was how tall Dutch people are and how they speak English. The guy was like 6 feet 7 inches and his voice was high to match, and all loopy and singsongy, very hard to take seriously as a person. I met 2 LiveJournal friends, I'll call them Adam and Betty. Adam came from the East Coast, Betty came from the West Coast, they met in the middle and vacationed in my state so all of us could hang out. Betty was fine. Exactly the same IRL as she was on LiveJournal. Really pretty, too. Adam, though. OMFG. The first night we met up, we were going to karaoke. Adam and Betty would drive to my house, meet my mom, and pick Twin and I up to go to the karaoke bar. Betty doesn't drink, so she'd drive the rental car. They knocked. I opened the door. Missy, my elderly terrier mutt who I love so much, immediately made friends with Betty. Betty walked all the way in, backing Missy up, and then Adam walked in. It was like a switch had flipped. Miss Dog lost her shit. She did the "I am going to kill you" bark, hackles raised, tail tucked between legs, snarling, snapping, and it sounded like she was screaming. Mom asked me to help get the dog under control and in the back room, so I did. Mom said she was worried about this guy Adam, and wanted me to be careful. I said Missy was obviously freaked out about him, too, so I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. So, we went to the karaoke bar. Betty ordered pop. This was a non-issue as she was a devout Mormon and didn't drink. I ordered pop, and Adam immediately started trying to talk me into alcohol because he knows I drink. Hard nope, dude. Being young and naive, I said, maybe later, rather than trying to pressure people to drink is a dick move and it makes people think you're a creep. Twin, who was still presenting female at the time, ordered pop. This surprised me, because he was going through a huge party phase, he spent most of his free time drunk. Adam started trying to talk Twin into alcohol, too. No, I have a headache, beer will make it worse. We did karaoke, it was unremarkable, we went home. The next day, Betty flew home. She just changed her ticket and bounced. She gave us the details in a filtered LiveJournal entry, saying that Adam wouldn't stop hitting on her and she didn't feel comfortable being in the same hotel as him. We all blocked him. I had a guy profess his love for me. Over Skype. He wanted to come see me. He lived in the UK. I live in the States. Except I had a boyfriend at the time. I told him this. I told him that he was wasting his time and I have zero interest in him. He still is coming. I told him that there was no time to see him, as I had work and school. He says it's fine. He will wait until I have time to see him. I told him not to come, he says he has his parents' blessings. So he came. He stayed in a hotel for 3 weeks while I had to deal with finals, work and spending time with my boyfriend. I hung out with him twice, once with a group of friends and once with my boyfriend. He got mad because he said that he wanted to hang out with me, alone, in his hotel room, and when I said no, he flipped. He said that because he flew over here, I should at least hang out with him. He flew back home to the UK a few days later and blocked me on all social media. TLDR dude travels from the UK to profess his love for me. Is upset that I didn't change my mind. Edit, okay, I'll include some backstory. I knew him for about 3 years prior. He was a fairly popular streamer at the time and I was one of his viewers, eventually became a mod for him. We started talking on Discord and then Skype. I was 20 at the of this event. Why did I even meet him? I knew him for a long time. I thought we were friends. I thought that he would come and realize I didn't have feelings for him if I said it to his face. I thought I could save the friendship. I never thought he would hurt me, but even then, I was never alone with him. Not even close. Yes. This is my GW account. No, it was not something I did while I talked to him. No, I never sent nudes nor did anything slightly inappropriate. Me showing off my body now does not mean I don't know how to make good decisions. Maybe not the decision you would have made, but still, you live and learn. Why would you even meet up with him? Like at all? Met this dude on EverQuest and we've played games together ever since. Been a part of the same guild, help each other out on mobile games, and have conversations about life in general. It isn't him that's the horror story, it was his mom. So one day, I think we were playing WoW at the time, I log on to do some quests. Suddenly his user comes on and asks to chat by video. We've done this before and there's no problem, but after I click to start the video chat, there's his mom butt naked on the screen. She asks me to watch her masturbate and I'm like, no lady, this is just awkward AF, and I log off for a few days. I get an email from my friend and he wants to know why I haven't shown up for quests or anything. So I tell him what happened and he is seriously like, WTF? Turns out his mom had been doing this to a lot of his online buddies and she eventually goes to prison for raping a minor or two. Buddy's doing great though, wife and kids, plus we still play the occasional game together. I, 25, was best friends with a woman, 46, for nearly 6 years. We would talk for hours and send each other gifts constantly. We shared everything from art to personal trauma. We were very close. When I fell in hard times, she was very kind and offered to take me in. I was so grateful that she would do this for me. After a few months, things started to change. I started to see why she was such a lonely person. She was mean, if not cruel, to anyone who ever disagreed with her or even had a different opinion. She was so mentally unstable that she couldn't even buy something without having to call her elderly mother and ask for permission. I found out that she was scamming the disability services to get money from the government because she didn't want her mother tracking her spending. She was so horrible to her caregiver. I'll admit that the guy was a complete moron, but he was still a sweet guy that was just trying to help. She was so abusive towards him that I had to step in on multiple occasions, which she fucking hated because it meant I wasn't on her side. That's when she turned on me. She began to freak out over small stuff. Screaming and crying because I missed a spot while mopping or because I spilled a little bit of water in the kitchen or ate my food too fast. She was fucking insane. As soon as I realized how messed up and unstable she was, after being screamed at and chased back to my room, I told her that I was going to be moving out as soon as possible. So, for the next week, she decided to make my life a living hell. She would scream about me to other people on the phone, telling lies about me, saying I did things I never did. And because she was a YouTuber with a big following, she doxed me on social media, telling people I punched holes in her walls and keyed her car. She even called the cops and tried to get me arrested for things I didn't do. Her followers began to harass me, sending me rape death threats. Then she started posting and sharing all of my personal secrets that I had shared with her in confidence. I ended up having to call my family to come get me because she was wanting to keep my dog so that I would have to keep in contact with her and I was no longer feeling safe. So, after 6 months of living in hell and 3 years of internet harassment and stalking that followed, I'll never meet someone I met online ever again. I have no interest in online friends. It's not safe because you never know how absolutely fucked up someone is until it's too late. Thanks for watching our video. If you like it, please smash the subscribe and like button to support the channel, so that we can create more quality content in the future.